Two teenage boys arrived at a luxury car dealership, their appearance far from what most would expect in such a setting. Dressed in combat shorts, plain white t-shirts, and worn-out sneakers, they rode their bicycles to the showroom, eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Inside, gleaming cars lined the floor, each one a symbol of wealth and exclusivity. The boys weren't loud, reckless, or disrespectful. They moved quietly, observing the cars with awe and admiration. One of them pointed to a midnight blue hypercar. His voice filled with wonder as he whispered, "That's it, that's the one." But before they could take another step, a salesman approached them, his expression already filled with condescension. Dressed in a tailored suit with polished shoes and slicked-back hair, he exuded smug professionalism. He didn't see two dream-filled boys, he saw two nobodies in clothes too casual for a place that sold vehicles worth nearly $1 million. He looked them up and down, then sneered, "I think you're in the wrong place." His voice was sharp, his tone patronizing. When one of the boys asked politely if the cars started at $900,000, the salesman's response was laced with mockery. Behind him, other staff chuckled, and nearby customers smirked or shook their heads. The boys' faces dropped. What had been a moment of joy turned into one of quiet shame. The younger boy looked at the floor while the older one muttered, "Sorry to bother you," and they turned to leave. As they exited through the glass doors, their shoulders slumped, their excitement drained. The staff went back to their conversations, the salesman returned to his desk with a satisfied grin, and life at the dealership moved on, believing they had just dealt with a couple of misguided kids wasting time. But they had no idea who those boys really were. They didn't know about the power and wealth behind those simple outfits, or the father who would soon arrive to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. In that moment, however, what remained was the sting of being judged not by character or behavior, but by clothing and perceived status. It was a harsh reminder of how often society confuses appearance with worth, and how easily kindness is forgotten in places where status seems to matter most. The boys left not with anger, but with something deeper, a quiet wound that only respect could heal. Just as the two boys were about to leave the dealership, humiliated and disheartened, a voice called out to them. Calm, sincere, and free of judgment. It belonged to Emily Torres, a staff member who had been quietly observing the interaction from her desk. Unlike the other employees who had mocked or ignored the boys, Emily saw something different. She didn't see what they were, she saw who they were. Two curious young minds with an authentic interest in something beyond their reach. Dressed modestly in a cream blouse and black slacks, she approached them not with a sales pitch, but with sincerity. "Do you have a minute?" she asked gently. Hesitant but intrigued, the boys turned back and re-entered the showroom. Emily walked them over to the very car they had been admiring and began explaining its features. Not just the specs, but the story behind its design, its craftsmanship, and the technology that made it unique. She knelt slightly to speak to them at eye level, treating them with a level of respect most adults don't even offer each other. The boys lit up again, their curiosity reignited. They asked thoughtful questions, not about the price, but about the mechanics, the engineering, and the vision behind the car. Emily was surprised. Most people who came in only cared about the badge or the status. These boys cared about the why. When she offered to let them sit inside, they hesitated, eyes wide in disbelief. "Seriously?" one asked. "Of course," she smiled. They entered the car carefully, with quiet reverence. No selfies, no joking, just pure appreciation. Before they left, Emily handed them her business card and said warmly, "You're always welcome here." That moment, simple, unforced, became a turning point. She had no idea who they were or what would come next, but her kindness stood in sharp contrast to the arrogance around her. In a world that often overlooks people based on appearance, Emily chose empathy, and that choice, small as it seemed, would soon change her life. Later that evening, the boys returned home to a mansion perched on a quiet hillside, an elegant estate where every detail spoke of understated luxury. But the opulence of their surroundings didn't erase the sting of the day. As they stepped through the grand front doors, their sneakers made soft thuds against the marble floor, their shoulders still weighed down by humiliation. The younger brother asked quietly, "Where's Dad?" and together they made their way down a sunlit hallway toward the study. Inside, their father, a composed man of presence rather than words, sat behind a grand piano, motionless, a glass of untouched whiskey nearby. He looked up as his sons entered, his eyes calm but attentive. "Back already?" he asked. The older boy hesitated, then shook his head. "Not really." The father motioned for them to sit. What followed was not an emotional outburst but a quiet, honest conversation. The boys recounted what had happened at the dealership, the way they had been looked down on, laughed at, and dismissed. The older brother explained how they had simply been curious, how polite they had been. Then the younger one took over, describing how the salesman had mocked them, and how other staff and customers had joined in the silent ridicule. Their father listened without interruption, his face unreadable, his silence full of weight. When they finished, he asked one question. "Did she know who you were?" referring to the woman who had treated them kindly. The boys shook their heads. "Smart," he murmured. After a pause, the younger brother asked, "Why do people treat you different based on what you're wearing?" The father's answer was quiet but powerful. "Because people often confuse appearance with value, and that tells you more about them than it ever does about you." With that, the conversation ended, not with outrage, but with understanding. The boys had been heard. They left the study not with a solution, but with something more important, a sense that their dignity mattered, and that someone powerful had truly listened. The next morning, as the sun rose over the quiet hillside estate, something extraordinary was already in motion. The father, who had remained calm the night before, had made a private phone call from his study, a simple instruction spoken with precision: deliver both Rolls-Royce Boat Tails by 8 a.m., and not to the house but directly in front of the dealership. No delays, no fanfare, just perfect timing. At the appointed hour, the dealership, normally bustling with casual browsers and sales-driven conversations, was silenced by the arrival of not one, but two of the rarest and most expensive cars in the world. The first was a sleek obsidian black boat tail, its curves glinting like a blade in the morning light. The second shimmered in deep royal blue with rose gold accents, like liquid wealth gliding across the pavement. Customers and employees alike stopped mid-sentence, mid-sip, and mid-sale to stare. Phones were raised, mouths dropped, whispered speculation spread like wildfire. Who were they for? Who was this? Then the car doors opened. From the back seat of the blue boat tail stepped the same two boys, still wearing their combat shorts and plain white t-shirts. The very same outfits that had led to their humiliation only a day before. But this time, their posture was different. Calm, steady, unapologetic. They circled to the front of the black boat tail just as its rear door opened and their father stepped out, dressed in a dark tailored suit that whispered power. He didn't glance around to seek attention. He didn't need to. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Where there had been laughter and arrogance the day before, there was now stunned silence and awe. The smug salesman from the previous day stared in disbelief, his confidence crumbling as recognition dawned. His smirk vanished. His hands fidgeted, but it was too late. The father hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't stormed in with fury. He simply arrived, a silent reckoning. This was no longer about a car. It was about principle, about dignity, about a father showing the world exactly what quiet power looks like. He hadn't forgotten how his sons were treated. He was just waiting for the right moment to respond. And now, the moment had arrived. Not with noise, but with presence. As the trio stepped through the glass doors of the dealership, the atmosphere inside thickened with tension. Conversations halted. Staff and customers turned to stare. The father moved with quiet authority, his sons walking just behind him. No longer nervous boys, but young men whose presence now demanded attention. At the reception desk, the father spoke in a clear, composed tone. "I'd like to speak to the staff member who assisted my sons yesterday." The receptionist blinked, startled. Before she could respond, the arrogant salesman from the day before rushed forward, plastering on a fake smile. "Sir, that was actually me." The father didn't even look at him. "No," he said firmly, "you weren't the one." The salesman faltered, his confidence draining. The father then turned to the dealership manager who had been watching cautiously from behind a glass wall. "You keep security footage, don't you?" The manager nodded. "Review yesterday's interactions." "I'll wait." The silence that followed was suffocating. Minutes later, the manager returned, face pale. "We've reviewed the footage," he said. "The employee who assisted your sons was Emily Torres. This man," he added, gesturing toward the now sweating salesman, "misrepresented the interaction and acted unprofessionally." The father turned slowly to face the salesman. "You judged my sons the moment they walked in, not based on who they were, but what they wore." The man opened his mouth, but no words came. "You mocked them, laughed at them, and assumed they didn't belong." Then, with quiet finality, "The irony is, you don't belong here." The manager stepped forward. "Effective immediately, you're terminated." Gasps rippled across the showroom. No one argued. No one defended him. As the disgraced salesman gathered his things and walked past the boys he had once belittled, heads turned not in mockery, but in shame. The boys stood still, quiet, composed. This time they weren't invisible. They had been seen, defended, and above all, respected. Their dignity, once stripped by arrogance, had been fully restored. And everyone watching knew this moment wasn't just about justice. It was about accountability. Moments after the confrontation ended, the father turned to the manager and said calmly, "Bring me Emily." A few seconds later, the woman who had shown kindness when no one else would, emerged from the back office. She looked slightly nervous, unsure of what was happening, but when she saw the two boys, her expression softened with recognition. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. The father, now wearing a subtle but genuine smile, replied, "More than okay." Then, turning back to the car the boys had admired the day before, he said, "They told me they liked that one." The entire showroom went still. "I'd like to purchase it," he continued, fully loaded, every feature they mentioned. Emily blinked in disbelief. "That model is over $3 million, she said carefully. The father nodded. "Then make it 3.1, and make sure the full commission goes to you." The staff stared in stunned silence as he signed the paperwork on the very counter where his sons had once been mocked. It was more than a transaction. It was a reckoning. A quiet but powerful declaration that integrity matters more than status. Emily accepted the gesture with grace, not prideful or boastful, but humbled. She had done what was right, without knowing who the boys were, or what it might bring her in return. And now, her kindness was not only recognized, but rewarded. The atmosphere in the dealership had completely transformed. Where once there had been arrogance, now there was reflection. The employees who had laughed stood awkwardly, unable to meet the boys' eyes. Customers who had smirked now remained silent, deeply aware of their own assumptions. Emily, meanwhile, received more than just a commission. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the regional director of the dealership. Inside it was her official promotion to senior sales consultant, complete with her own office, her own team, and a permanent seat at the table where decisions were made. She didn't cry or boast. She simply walked through the showroom with quiet pride, passing by the same colleagues who had doubted her instincts just a day earlier. That day, a lesson echoed through the entire dealership. Kindness is never wasted. Emily's empathy had changed the course of her career and reminded everyone watching that respect isn't reserved for the wealthy. It's a choice, a reflection of character, and one person's compassion can shift an entire room. This story is a powerful reminder that true worth cannot be measured by appearance, status, or wealth. In a world increasingly focused on surface impressions, it teaches us that dignity, kindness, and quiet strength are what truly define a person. The father's calm but decisive actions show that power doesn't need to shout. It can speak through presence, through character, and through how we choose to treat others. Emily's kindness reminds us that small moments of empathy can leave lasting impacts, even when no one is watching. For older generations who have seen the world change in many ways, this story reaffirms timeless values. Respect should never be conditional, and people should never be judged by what they wear or what they seem to lack. Instead, we must look deeper, listen more, and treat everyone with grace. After all, The most profound lessons in life are not taught through grand gestures, but through the quiet dignity of doing what is right, even when it's easy to follow the crowd. As we age, may we continue to lead by example and remember that kindness costs nothing, but its value is immeasurable.